Welcome. Emotions are everywhere. So how can we be smarter with our feelings? The answer is emotional intelligence, or EQ. We're delighted you're watching, because at 6 seconds, we're working towards 1 billion people practicing the skills of emotional intelligence. Can we count you in? Here on 6 Seconds channel, you'll find practical skills for work and life, inspiration for today, and support to build a better future for all.
Welcome, everybody. Today is Tuesday, and as every week, we have a great live show for you. We're happy to be here. We know those are challenging times, and so we really make a point of connecting together and creating an opportunity for all of us to meet and talk about the impact of emotional intelligence in many different aspects of our lives. And today, we're going to focus on education and how, in these difficult times, what are the challenges and what are the opportunities of this challenging for emotional intelligence and social emotional learning as well. Today's panel is called Supporting Teachers, Reaching Kids, and it's going to be a double feature, so stay tuned for part 1 and part 2. Just a reminder, this event is part of Grow You, which is a weekly schedule of 15 live events, some free and some paid, and I would love you to join some of the ones that are happening this week. This is just a quick overview of the schedule. You can see I also have a session on Friday, so tune into that one at 8 a.m. Pacific time if you want to know more about the EQ Swiss Army knife tools. With that, I want to introduce you to Joshua Freedman, our CEO and moderator of today's panel.
Thank you, Tom. When we planned today's show, we were thinking primarily about what was going on for educators being at a distance and far away from the kids that they work with, and how that's affecting educators and the children they serve and families. And of course, in the recent days, there's been a lot of new awareness about racism and Black Lives Matter and the systemic inequities that exist in the US and in many countries around the world. And of course, this is connected to the work of education and to the work of emotional intelligence. So I'm really grateful that we get to have this chance to talk today. I'd like to welcome our panelists. I think this is still quite relevant to where we are today. Last week, a teacher told me that every day I feel like a failure. I can't actually do the important part of my job. I can't reach my kids. And I think for many of us as educators, as parents, as a physician, as change makers, we're looking at the level of disconnection, both from learning at a distance, to racial inequities, to many systemic challenges that are keeping us from connecting together. So I'd like to take a moment and ask each of you to introduce yourself and tell us a couple of feelings that are present for you as you're thinking about the work that you're committed to doing in this space of helping people connect. Natalia, can we start with you?
Sure. Thank you, Joshua. Hello, everyone. I am Natalia Herrera. I'm from Colombia, but I'm now here in Spain, in Madrid. I am alumni from Pictorial Network. I am a collaborator on the Spanish Association of Second Chance Schools. So, well, for me, now is an opportunity to stay here sharing with you our experience. I have to say that I'm just a beginner learning emotional intelligence participant or something like this. I have to say that this opportunity to share this time, even when we know that it's a hard moment in the world, I feel so lucky to stay here just to try to grow together, to share together, and to feel hope and to create hope together. So thank you for this, and thank you everyone to stay here.
Thank you, Natalia. Michael, how about you?
Josh, always good to be amongst folks who are thinking about how we use our thinking, feeling, and to make powerful choices. And as you asked the question today, many thoughts were going through my mind. And one of them, the three thoughts that came up, or the three feelings are, I feel the tension. So as a Black man in America, as an African-American man, I feel the tension of all of the spiraling events that are impacting our schools, but also impacting my life, as well as I feel saddened, Josh. I feel deeply saddened. And I would also add, because of the work that we are attempting to do through venues like this, 6 Seconds and other social emotional learning organizations, I have some sense of hope because I think in times like these, people of color, African Americans, can feel disconnected. And so this is providing some level of connection for me. So I'm deeply appreciative, and that's how I'm feeling right now.
Michael, I wanted to just say, as a white man, I'm also feeling some of what you said, and I wish I could understand your experience better than I do. And I'm grateful that you're here.
Thanks,
Mark?
Josh.
Mark, how about you?
Hi, everybody. This is I'm Mark Brackett. My day job is I am the director of the Yale Center for Emotional Intelligence and a professor at Yale. I'm going to just echo, what Michael and Josh just said. I'm really in not a great place in terms of feeling these days. A lot of anger, a lot of sadness, a lot of fear. As much empathy as I possibly can have, especially for African Americans here in the United States with what's happened. And I'm a chronic optimist and deep in my immune system and my blood system. So I'm just also hopeful that we can unite this nation and do whatever it takes to support especially our Black children and adults going through this process.
Thank you, Mark. And I just want to acknowledge you sharing that these are difficult feelings, and maybe it is the right emotional place.
As we say in our work, right? My book is called Permission to Feel. And I think that it would be weird for me to say, like, what do I have to do to be happy today? Mm-hmm. I'm not happy, and I'm okay without being happy. And it's okay to be uncomfortable, and I think it's okay to have negative emotions. It is what it is. My hope is that I don't let them destroy me. I hope that I can use them wisely, to help make change.
Dimitri, how about you?
Hi, everyone. My name is Dimitri Christakis. I'm a pediatrician and epidemiologist at the University of Washington, and I direct the Center for Child Health, Behavior, and Development at Seattle Children's Research Institute. My laboratory focuses on ways to optimize children's cognitive, social, and emotional development. And for the last 12 weeks, since the pandemic here started and schools closed, I've been really concerned about the impact that is having on children's cognitive, social, and emotional development, and especially low-income children and children of color who are being, I think, disproportionately negatively impacted. And then all of a sudden, on top of that, came the events of the past week, which in many ways overshadow the ongoing crisis, and I think compound it. And I'm as worried as I was before about children in this country and the impact of school closure. I'm bordering on panicked right now because of the horrific events. And I say events because we're focusing a lot on one event, and it's clearly part of a much larger picture that's gone on for way too long. So I'll leave it at that.
Thank you, Dimitri, and I'm really appreciate you making the time. You wrote an editorial that actually was one of the catalysts for us creating this show, and I'd like, oh, let's see if we can get that guy. So it's really, I really appreciate you stepping into this. And Christy, how about you?
Hi, everyone. My name is Christy Golisarian. I am the Director for Principled Innovation at Arizona State University at the Mary Lou Fulton Teachers College. And yeah, over the last several days, my feelings have been pretty much on a roller coaster. As we're thinking about how we support our educators and our students as they're going through these incredibly challenging times. Just what is it that they need, and especially our educators, our Black educators, our educators of color, and the types of feelings that are on my heart right now are, similar to what others have said, just very saddened right now. A lot of uncertainty, feeling very vulnerable, definitely, and curious. Remaining open and trying to listen, and recognizing that I can't possibly know how so many people in our world are actually feeling right now, but wanting to understand and be there in whatever way is right for them right now.
Thank you, Christy. I want to just take a moment and welcome people who are watching live. And we have people from all over the world joining us. And I just wanted to take a moment and highlight some of the comments from people and say welcome. One of the things that I find really special about the work that we do at 6 Seconds is the opportunity to connect with people from all over the world, even in this time when there's so much disconnection. And I think when people are feeling disconnection, it becomes even more important and challenging to do this. So those of you who are here live, if you have a question or a comment, something that you want to add, please do type, because I'm watching that as we're going along and would like to include you in the conversation. I want to take Kamita's comment here about what's next. And I'd like to know, what's your level of optimism? Mark, you alluded to this. What's your level of optimism about what's coming next in education and for children and families? And maybe we could start by just giving you a little challenge of holding up some number of fingers. So this is, I'm totally optimistic. I know that we're going to flourish on the other side of this. This means I feel completely powerless, and I don't know that we're going to get through this. So those of you who are watching, I would appreciate it if you would also join in this rating scale check-in of optimism and tell us on your scale from 0 to 5 how your level of optimism is. And let's just do a quick check-in with the panel. Okay, I'm in the right place to get my optimism boosted up a little bit. And I know Annabelle is here, so in the second half, I know my optimism is going to come up to right back close to 5. Mark, let's come back to you. What's one reason why you gave that rating?
I think it's genetics. But I'm usually the most negative, optimistic person I know. But joking aside, I think that we've had a wake-up call, honestly, and that it's, there's been damage. There's a lot of negative emotion right now, but emotions are signals, right? They're information, and I think that we're seeing very clearly that now is the time. So I'm very hopeful in that people are going to be listening more than they ever had, especially to people who have been suffering. Just going back to the global issue of, with COVID-19, we've done a number of studies over the last couple of weeks. We did one with about 6,000 teachers. We found the number one emotion is anxiety right now, which is no surprise. 3 years ago when we did the same study, it was frustrated and stressed. It's now turned to anxiety. We did a study with 1,000 of New York City's public school leaders. Anxiety came up as number one, parents, anxiety number one. So, we are in a place of uncertainty, unpredictability, where it feels like this is going to last forever. And I think it's our moral obligation to support people in managing this anxiety, not trying to tell them to suppress it, deny it, repress it, blame it out on other people. But seriously, I think we need to provide our nation, with healing energy, especially around. Previously, it was anxiety up until last week. I think now if we did the study again, it would be anxiety, anger, and probably some despair. I can go on and on, but I'll just stop there for now.
Thank you, Dimitri. What is your sense of what's needed right now in the population that you work with and people you're interacting with?
Well, I felt very strongly that we need to get children back to school. I felt that should be a priority. Up until a week ago, I felt it was critical because we're not able to meet their educational needs through distance learning, particularly for primary school children, particularly for low-income children, particularly for children with special needs. And we're not able to meet their social emotional needs through distance learning. It's even more critical now. I think children need the opportunity to connect with each other in real time and space in order to help heal the pain they're feeling now. And I think they need the close counsel and comfort of their teachers, who in many cases are critical role models and mentors. They need to be with them to help process a lot of what they're going through. So as concerned as I was before that children are in isolation and suffering the effects of it. So we know from data out of China that the incidence of anxiety and depression for children under home confinement increased by about 20%. We're just getting data from the US. I expect it to be similar. And that all predated the horrific events of this past week. So in a situation where I was already worried about children being isolated and suffering increased anxiety and depression, now we put on top of that all of the events of the past week. And I'm deeply, deeply concerned. And as important as it was for us to get children back to school a week ago, it's an imperative now.
Thank you.
Dimitri, if I could just make one comment, Josh. I was just on a phone call with some of my colleagues in the Pacific Northwest, superintendents in Seattle and Highline areas, and it's looking very uncertain around even next year. So that's what I learned today.
Yes, I'm aggressively working to try to make children going back to school an imperative across the country, and of course in my backyard here. We've declared the pork supply a national emergency, and I'm much more concerned about the brain supply than the pork supply. We need to get kids back, and we need to give very clear direction to school districts that this is a societal priority, and we need to work backwards from that. The children should be the first population that returns to work, which for them is school.
And at the same time, there's 6 million confirmed cases globally, and it, I believe, is going up. Michael, what are you seeing and hearing from your students and your colleagues in your community as an educator and somebody who's working on racial justice?
Yeah, Jeff, that's a big question. And you're good at asking big questions, so I think I'm in good company. One of the things that in the school system, I'm in an independent school system, and like others have said, just the idea of how do we make sure we're putting students first? How do we get them back into environments where they're in touch with their feelings and they're connecting with others? It's quite a challenge, and our team had to go from being face to face to online really overnight, and we feel like we've done well considering the situation we've been in. Josh, one of the things that I'm hearing from students, I was on a call just today, and students wondering, feeling confused or not sure about what's next or what's the uncertainty like. And if that's on the side for students, I run something called an EQ Lab every Tuesday morning at 7:15, quite early, and it's really for early birds that show up. And what I keep hearing is we have to do the best that we can, and to have an environment in which they can share their feelings really supports their ability to serve their students when they go back to the classroom. So that's some of the things I'm seeing right now.
Christy, you likewise are in touch with a lot of educators every day. What are you hearing from educators?
Yes, so interestingly enough, I was just on a call this morning with someone who was saying that, as we're thinking about what school looks like when we go back, some of the things that we're hearing are a little frightening. So, teachers behind plexiglass and students sitting in rows of desks, distanced from each other. And it's concerning, how are we going to support their emotional and social well-being when we have such a structured, distanced physical environment that they'll be in. I also heard from one district, they're hearing from parents that there's about 40% of their population that are not planning on sending their students back to school and are planning on homeschooling. And this is something that, I think is, in our position as a teacher preparation program, how are we preparing our families to support their children's educational needs and social and emotional needs if they're not planning on sending them back to school? So how do we bring the community around our students and start thinking about the community as educators as well?
I love that theme, and I want to come back to that. Christy, Natalia, how about you? And then we'll come back to community.
I'm just want to add something that also this morning, one teacher said to me that they were in a meeting just trying to plan and to try to innovate a new way to start the new year, not the classes. And something that concerned me is that maybe we will start in this process to innovation, but we need to remember and don't forget that we need to focus now in this social emotional intelligence for our kids. And maybe that concerning me now is all this innovation that is coming after all the coronavirus. It's necessary that don't forget this. So
yeah.
And because here in Spain we are finished the year, and we are planning the comeback. So I'm concerned about this, how it's going to be the innovation applying also the social emotional intelligence.
Well, somebody asked, we'll ask Michael this in a second, about the EQ Lab. I've certainly heard from a lot of educators and parents that it's like we just went back 50 years in pedagogy, and it's now like reading, writing, arithmetic, here's a list of facts, and parent, you need to sit next to your child and do this work. I know Michael and Dimitri, you're both parents. I don't know about others. My kids are pretty big, so I haven't had to sit next to them doing their work. But what happens, Michael, what's going on for you as a dad of some fairly small and kids who need some attention, and also trying to be an educator and also trying to grapple with what you're grappling with?
Josh, I think it is a formidable challenge every day. I know when as we're planning for the Summer Principals Academy, you've heard my kids in the background sometimes running around. And I think when we think about children I have a 4-year-old, a 5-year-old, and a 7-year-old. And to see my 5-year-old, who's this vivacious, I think brilliant little guy, be in front of the screen, and I know our school is doing a good job at engaging him, but to see the frustration for him as a 5-year-old after some time, I have to be innovative. My wife has to be innovative to figure out how do we give him some shifting opportunities. And so one thing that I feel is really powerful that my wife has done is she's in collaboration with his teacher is to said, can I take what is on the screen and write it? Because by him being able to actually write it down, he's been able to engage more. And it was it helped to release some of the burden that we were facing, because for kids to go from face to face to online overnight has been quite the challenge. And so we're continuing looking for ways to listen to our child to see what they need and trying to find ways to partner with the schools to serve them.
Dimitri, how about you as a parent? What's your parenting view?
Well, full disclosure, my children are both in college. One just actually graduated, and so my educational experience with them was them doing distance learning in my house when both of their colleges shut down.
Similar for me.
But I'll point out that even for college students, a lot was lost through the distance process, and this was from a fairly well-endowed, well-resourced university that, in theory, had all of the bandwidth needed to provide that experience. I think Michael really illustrated the problem, and I'll just state it. Distance learning does not work for primary school students. We need to acknowledge that as a given. There should be no expectation that children can learn through a screen without significant parental support, the kind of support that Michael and his wife are able to give their children, thankfully. But that's an unreasonable expectation for many parents, particularly for parents who are low income and have to work, who are essential workers and aren't able to work from home. And what does that mean? That means that if we continue the distance learning model, we are going to subject a lot of young children who are already disadvantaged to significant educational disadvantage, additional educational disadvantage. Now, we know from much research that's been done that if children don't read at grade level by 3rd grade, they're 4 times less likely to graduate high school than those who do. Low-income children who don't read at grade level by 3rd grade are 13 times more likely to not graduate high school. So if we continue this distance learning model that's not going to work for children who don't have homeschooling options, we are going to see significant effects, not today, but 15 years from now. And those effects are going to be borne disproportionately by low-income families. So I think we have to acknowledge that fact, and we have to figure out an equitable way to help all children learn, not just cognitively, but socially and emotionally.
So let's go to that point. What is working? Are you seeing what gives you any sense that we can do social emotional learning at a distance? Michael, somebody asked about the EQ lab. Maybe you could just say a word about that. And then Mark, let's come back to you on what you're seeing is actually helping increase connectedness.
Sure. So one of the being a preferred partner with 6 Seconds, I really appreciate the idea, kind of the framework is a teaching and learning framework. So from some of the training that I've done with 6 Seconds, I got the idea of, in order to create a school that is thinking about social emotional learning, you just don't share a curriculum, or you shouldn't just share a curriculum. And so we have an EQ lab, and I've been running it for about 4 years. And the goal is to engage people, faculty members and staff, but mostly faculty at this point, for 40 minutes, 35 to 40 minutes, with this idea of a framework that looks at thinking, or know yourself, choose yourself, and give yourself. And I used like the TFA model, thinking, feeling, and acting. So from 7:15 to 7:50, we just check in to say, how are you doing? What are some of the thoughts that you're having? What are some of the feelings, and how do you want to act? And most recently, 6 Seconds has done a wonderful program called EQ Fun Day on Fridays. And so I took some of those concepts from my regional director, Jim Vave, and we have been using that in the lab. So essentially, it's an opportunity to develop teachers' social emotional learning skills in an environment where it's not just curriculum, but it's their life. Because we believe that if you develop a person's life, we teach who we are. And so that's what we've been exploring over these past few years.
I want to double tap on that later. Mark, let's go to you.
Sure.
Social emotional learning at a distance.
Yeah, so we have been quite responsive. You know, Ruler is our approach to SEL, as you know, and we are in about 2,500 schools across the United States and in other countries. And luckily, you know, many of the tools that we've developed, the one that's the most well known is the mood meter. It's my little poster here. We've built virtual apps for that, or apps for that, so that people can check in virtually. It's been very helpful for teachers to, you know, check in with students in terms of, you know, what color they're in, what's their feeling, what's the reason for their feeling, and then also obviously providing strategies, oftentimes not only for the children, but for the adults, you know, parents and other caretakers who are with kids. We've also thought a lot about virtual school climate, and we wrote a piece that we published a couple weeks ago on that. And the truth is, all of the indicators, you know, of a positive school climate, whether it be relationships between children and adults, or adults to adults, or emotional safety, engaging instruction, right? They all apply to this remote learning environment. So I think the question is to ask ourselves, okay, so what are the strategies, what are the tools that we need to use to make sure that children feel, you know, that emotional safety or engagement? And from our perspective, it really comes from being, as I like to call it, the emotion scientist, as opposed to the emotion judge, and just asking, you know, finding out what people are feeling, finding out what the cause of that feeling is, and asking people what their needs are, aggregating that information and trying to be responsive to it.
I want to come back to racism, but before we do that, I want to see if Natalia or Christy, if you want to add anything about this topic of emotional connection at a distance. Okay.
The only thing that go ahead, Natalia.
Both of you do.
Don't worry.
Christy, go ahead.
The only thing that I'd like to add is, you know, thinking about what virtual learning actually could look like. And this, I think, also ties back to this idea of innovation in this time right now, and how are we, you know, actually approaching the way that we're innovating, especially if we are looking at virtual learning, and, you know, thinking about the emotional well-being of students and that connection, you know, taking that into consideration as we are thinking about new solutions for virtual learning. Because right now, from what I'm hearing, the way it's being done just is not working from an academic perspective, and especially not from an emotional connection perspective. So I think that it's just a part of what we need to really consider as we're thinking about how we innovate.
And what we prioritize, because if we say education is about meeting this assignment, then that's what we're going to innovate around. But if we say education is actually about relationships that facilitate reading this assignment, we're going to prioritize in a different way. Natalia, one more comment on this?
Just want to add and support that something that Michael said, and it's like, we as educators, we are going to teach what we are. And now that is important that not also just think about how we are going to teach our students to take care of themselves. We need also, as educators, to support each other, to take care also of our colleagues or our teammates, and just take care that also we are feeling and facing all this situation. And we need also to take ourselves to take care our teachers, our students.
Yeah, this systems approach, and somebody earlier, this idea of thinking about education community, and as educators, our job is to support that community, to educate each other and themselves. And we'll come back to that in our second act in about 9 minutes. I want to come back to racism before we end this segment. I was thinking that the challenge we're facing is really difficult with coronavirus. And in the past, when people have said to me, well, let's talk about racism, I've said, and Michael and I have had this conversation, and I've said, yeah, I care about that, but it's not my focus. And I have to revise that now. I'm feeling like it's impossible for us to do this work of emotional intelligence if we don't also address the context in which we're doing it. But it feels completely overwhelming to me, to be totally honest. I look at the intersectionalities of gender bias and racial bias and economic structures and what's happening in the planet and our education systems and our community structures and our family structures, our health system. And I'm like, my optimism goes down really quickly as the problem starts getting so big. So how do we do this in a way that we can work on all of these things at once without becoming completely overwhelmed? And Michael, since you asked me the question weeks and months and years ago, I'm just going to put it back to you.
Oh boy, before I even attempt to answer that, just having forums like this today, being able to hear colleagues from different areas talk about how we come together is really important. And I think, Mark, I really appreciated something you said earlier, that it's okay to not feel good. I think sometimes we say we have to always feel good. And the reality is that when we don't feel good, it doesn't mean that we're not emotionally intelligent. We're actually using the data from that. And so when I think about how do we utilize this sense of racism in the school and in the world, 6 seconds has been very powerful for me as a diversity officer, because growing up in American society, at least for me, you learn as a Black man, you learn to be in this box. And if you can stay in this box, I once had someone say, keep your nose under the radar so someone doesn't know that you're there. There's a cost to that. And 6 seconds, and I have family all over the world, even with the Yale family that Mark has been talking about, to look at how does cultural competence, what's the role of cultural competence in EQ? And for me, what I've been doing to attempt to try to navigate these challenging waters that we're in is to go, well, what do I need to be aware of about the current situation? As a Black man, as a white man, as a woman, as someone who's in the LGBT community, so that awareness is very specific for us all. Then we go to, well, what are my options? So if our listeners are saying, as a white person, I don't know what to do. Well, we need to be aware of that. We don't know what to do. Then begin to brainstorm with a few people what some of the options that we can take to move forward. And which, Josh, which I think is most challenging, and you've been so good at helping to encourage me and challenge me, is what will we commit to do? Yeah. We know that online learning may not be the best format. So how do we, as someone said, how do we find new solutions? And so when I think about the racism that we're facing and we're seeing in the cultural clashes, the EQ process, for me specifically, as someone who has seen mirror images of myself killed in the streets and abused for hundreds and hundreds of years, this EQ or this emotional learning process gives me some hope, because I can take a simple process and begin to go, what do I need to be aware of? What are some of the options? And then what will I commit to doing? Easier said than done, but it gives me a starting point.
Yeah, thank you, Michael. There's so much we could talk about this. And tomorrow, I'm so grateful you and several others have agreed that tomorrow, we're going to have another community meeting specifically to talk about racism and our feelings and how we can look for solutions together. So those of you who are watching now, we'll see you in 24 hours for that. And we'll be sending out an announcement about that. And I think Michael has agreed to facilitate that conversation, but I'm not quite sure he totally agreed. I might be putting him on the spot right now.
I agreed.
I want to ask all of you in the chat and in the panel. So I'm talking about this problem of this overwhelming complexity of all of these issues. Where is the leverage point for you? Where is the common ground, or where can we apply our energy to work on this constellation of problems in a way that feels possible to you. Mark?
Yeah, I think, going back to what Michael was just talking about is, when I hear him speak, I realized, the privilege that I have had to express my anger, and where he, as he said, keep your nose under the radar, and the rules are different for white and black people around who has the privilege to express their anger. And I think that, that's clearly a problem, and it's clearly something that we need, that people may not know. And, they're not thinking in terms of that privilege, in terms of even expressing feelings. And so, the vehicle that I know best is education, right? Building people's awareness, helping people see their biases, and then having, a deep understanding of sociocultural history, and to show people that teach people about those inequities, and challenge them. I remember this video. I cannot remember the woman's name, but it was an audience of mostly white people, and she said, "How many of you are willing to stand? And how many of you would be happy being a black person in our country right now?" And nobody stood up. And so, then why are you happy, to help, or why are you not supporting people, or why are you not making the change? So, to me, education is so important, and making people aware of their biases.
And, I'll just go on record here again and say, when I first heard Black Lives Matter, my first reaction was, wait, all lives matter. When I first heard white privilege, I'm like, well, my life doesn't seem that easy. And yet, as I've learned, and I think this is a beautiful thing to what you said, Mark, is like, we can learn, and it's not easy, but I now see that I can stand up and say Black Lives Matter. And that doesn't any way diminish that I see that that all lives matter, but that's where the attention's needed. And that my white privilege gives me an opportunity to do something that I need to do. Christy, Natalia, Dimitri, final thoughts. Christy, go ahead.
Inquiry, questioning, listening to multiple perspectives, and then sitting back and listen. Truly listening to what people have to say. I feel like that's the direction that we need to go in right now, in order to be able to come together and find creative solutions that we can stand behind, and then really get into that self-reflection as well before we make any decisions and take any action, because it's it's just important to be able to listen right now, and that's what I've been trying to do.
Thank you, Christy. Natalia, where's the leverage point for you?
I completely agree. We need to listen and to really have the clue or empathy with people before to take any decision or to do whatever we want to do. So no more to add, really. I'm really glad to listen to you and all your point of view also.
Thank you, Natalia. Dimitri, how about you? Where's your point of leverage that you see?
Well, I think we've once again ripped the scab off of a long festering wound in our society. It's not the first time we've done it, but I hope this time we make a sustained effort to heal that wound. And I think in the past we thought we've gotten past it way before we have. And I guess if there's any good that can come out of Mr. Floyd's death, it's that that his martyrdom can get us to a place where we realize that all of us can accept that Black Lives Matter, and that we will make a sustained effort to focus on disequities, and recognize that that's not going to be an easy fix. It's not going to happen. It hasn't happened for 250 years. It's not going to happen with the election of a new president. It's not going to happen with any of the other local changes we might make, even though we need to make those changes. It's only going to happen through all of us committing deeply on a daily basis to make it a point of emphasis in everything we do, in every decision we make, in every action we engage in.
Thank you. Mark, a final comment?
My final comment is that this is, unlike other learnings, like I know that 5 + 5 = 10, and when I go for my coffee, can't wait to go out for a coffee, but I go to a cappuccino, it's $4.50, and I give a $5 bill, I get my 50 cents back. I've learned that when I was young, and that will stay with me forever. I think that we have to just accept the fact that emotions are more complex, that emotional intelligence is dynamic, and that we're going to be always in learning mode.
Thank you. And Michael, last word from this section of the show.
Yeah, just thinking about the leverage, the idea of leverage, even all of us that are on the video today, and thinking about, I think Christy said it, new solutions. The solutions are usually in the room. And one of the 6 seconds principles is that wisdom lives within. And so as we have the humility to listen to each other and to figure out how do we provide those solutions that are needed, I think it, particularly around race and racism, people of color knowing that you see, it helps me to realize that I'm not just seeing things alone. So I'm deeply excited about the opportunity to leverage to find out what options we have collectively to put forward some of these solutions.
Thank you, Michael, and thank you all. I greatly appreciate you being here, and we're going to continue this conversation now in our second half of the show. So those who were on in the first half, really appreciate you being here and the wisdom that you've shared. And as we're going through for a minute to get our second group of panelists into the studio, I just want to share a couple of comments from the chat. And I think this came up a lot about supporting ourselves as educators, supporting each other as educators, as parents, so that we can be doing this work. And that includes taking care of our mental health. And mental health is not a negative thing. A lot of people hear the word mental health and they hear mental illness. But mental health is about this asset building. It's about being able to have these conversations. And there are so many tools we have in our communities and cultures and our history that we can draw on. And that history goes back thousands of years. And if we can, think about the wisdom of the ages that's captured in culture, that's captured in literature, I think that's an incredible tool for us. I think this is key to these conversations. It's not just empathy here. There's also an emotional empathy here. And that requires us to keep learning. And I lost my comment where somebody wrote that we've got to keep learning. Yeah, and Nassim, these issues of racism are deeply embedded in our societies all over the world. And partly it's colonialism, but part of it predates colonialism. And there's this virus in the human experience that puts us in this position of putting ourselves over one another and trying to divide. And I think it's because we're pack animals. And I don't think we have to live that way forever. I think we can, and that's part of the promise of emotional intelligence. Okay, I think I've stalled long enough now for our other panelists to join. And then I just want to bring this up. I think, Hina, if I'm pronouncing your name right, I think that's a very powerful question. And I think it's rooted in insecurity. I think it's rooted in we get into self-judgment and disconnection from self. And that's why in 6 Seconds work, we talk about change has to start on the inside. We have to learn to listen to and appreciate ourselves, and that there are no negative emotions, that we are experiencing what we're experiencing, and that's a message from us to us, and it's an important and valuable message. And when we can learn to have that deep self-compassion and self-acceptance, we then, I think, are much more able to be in a place of accepting. And actually, what I see is that as we go deeper into this sense of connectedness, we realize we're not at all different. We're actually all literally in this together because we are all together. So that was a kind of big answer. Great. So we're going to go into our second panel now. And Judy's point here, I think, is well taken to launch us into our second panel. So if we could get our panelists on, and I think we're just missing David, who maybe is, oh, I'm missing a couple of people. Okay. So let's just start with those of you who are here anyway. And Annabelle, let's start with you. Where is your level of optimism and why?
Well, that's a very interesting question, Josh. And my level of optimism, as you always know, is a 10. It has to be because it's a choice that I make. It's not just a natural attitude. And so I'm choosing to be optimistic.
And Annabelle, let's start with you. Where is your level of optimism and why?
So that's a very interesting question, Josh. And my level of optimism, as you always know,
I'm
is
hearing a lot of...
Because it's a choice that I make. It's not just a natural attitude. And so I'm choosing to be optimistic.
I'm hearing a lot of echo. Sean, could you mute everyone, please? So those of you who are on the live stream, make sure you're not also watching the live stream on YouTube, because it's a little bit delayed. And if you're watching it on YouTube, it's going to echo back here, which is not going to work out very well. Okay, great. Macarena, I'm glad you're here. Thank you. And Annabelle, you didn't introduce yourself, so I'll just introduce you. Annabelle Jensen is the president of 6 Seconds. And at 80 years young, Annabelle is the most innovative person I've ever met. And an educator of educators who's literally taught tens of thousands of educators about social emotional learning, and truly one of the pioneers in social emotional learning in the world. So thank you for being here, Annabelle. Henry, would you introduce yourself and tell us where your level of optimism is?
Sure. Thanks very much for the invitation. My name's Henry May. I live in Colombia in South America. I run an organization called Co-School, and we focus on social and emotional learning programs for youth and educators across this amazing country. My level of optimism, I guess like Annabelle, I'm seen as an optimistic person, and I feel optimism a lot of the time. And like Annabelle, I think that's a personal choice. We're living in complex times, and I guess I'm feeling like the previous panelists, a mixture of emotions, and not all of those emotions are high energy or totally optimistic emotions. However, I lean towards optimism at the moment because of what I'm seeing, both in recent days in the United States and around the world. The groundswell of young people making their voices heard, the feeling of a collective moving together makes me feel optimistic, makes me feel that change is possible. And on an education point of view, actually the coronavirus situation, again, for me, has given cause to optimism. And in Colombia, we've been working with the Ministry of Education, and they've explicitly prioritized social and emotional learning and emotional well-being here. So that's reason for optimism. And this is a time of change, a time of transition, and that brings with it new possibilities. And so I believe there is reason to be optimistic, and I guess I'm feeling somewhat optimistic.
Thank you, Henry. David, the question is, what is your level of optimism at the moment and why?
Well, good morning, everybody. I'm very happy to be here. Josh, thank you for having me. Annabelle, it's so wonderful to see you again. So when I think about my level of optimism, I think about the opportunity for progress. So I'm having a conversation with a colleague of mine, and at every generation, we have the responsibility to move our nation, our society forward. And I'm just pleased that that we have so much work to do so that our generation can continue to move and take that work, so that we can kind of beget to our future the same kind of progress that those begat to us. So I'm optimistic. I know that the key is to move forward. The key is to be constructive. And by taking emotions and channeling them into constructive outcomes and outlets, we can move forward and we can move our society to where it needs to be.
David, thank you. I said in the first part of the show that I'm feeling pretty overwhelmed. I thought I was overwhelmed last week, and now I feel even more overwhelmed. Not that we shouldn't be addressing the systemic issues of racism. We need to, but it just feels like so much right now. And but hearing you say that, I think it's really important that we can't just keep waiting, virus or not. We have to take the opportunity we have. Macarena, what's your level of optimism? And then we'll come back to you, Annabelle.
Hello, Josh. I feel very optimistic because I think that precisely now, with all the coronavirus, people in Peru are at last looking to education. No, education has been very, very poor in my country the last years, and we are at last taking care of it. No.
Thank you. And Macarena, for those who haven't yet met your work, is doing incredible work on bringing a very unusual approach to education at a distance. In our panel earlier, I was saying how most of the distance learning that I'm seeing is so boring and lacking emotion. And I don't speak very much Spanish, but I've seen some of what you've been creating, and there's just this energy and joyfulness and youth in it. Maria, where's your level of optimism and why?
So I'm a naturally optimistic person, and I'm optimistic because of two reasons. One, our present situation has allowed conversations that have been needed to be had. People are having it in education spaces. And the second reason why I'm highly optimistic is because of our past history. So there is a historical there's a history of people of color thriving and creating change under distress and under stress, where people of color have created new opportunities to learn, to thrive, and also to survive. So drawing upon history and also the current changes that I'm seeing in education spaces, I'm very, very optimistic.
Annabelle, you had something to add. Oh, you're muted.
I've chosen optimism. I think optimism is the basis of creativity. And I also want to share that I'm feeling appalled and that I'm angry. And Josh, you know, anger is not an emotion that comes easily to me. I want to share with you all that my son spent Saturday night in jail. He was arrested because he was taking pictures. And so he and I have had several conversations about this, and I want to encourage everybody to find their voice and to use it and to speak about what they see and about what they feel.
Thank you. We have this constellation of deep, deep challenges. Coronavirus was a big challenge, and now we're realizing perhaps more of the intersectionality of these challenges. So I asked the last group of panelists, and I want to go to each of you with this now. Where is the leverage point as we look at racism, sexism, entrenched systems of inequity, political corruption, blah. That's just, the list goes on, and then the environment and the pandemic. Where is the leverage point for us to actually make a difference? Macarena?
Yes, I think that everything starts when we as humans, as part of a society, and governments will really give the value that education has, because for me personally, I think education is the root of the flower, is the basics for any society. So if you change the education system and you are part of a new education system where emotional intelligence is fundamental, those kids will raise up as better human beings, where racism will not exist, where corruption will not exist. And here in Peru, the situation, not only in Peru, around the world, the situation about corruption is horrible. It's tremendous. It's a very, very important problem. So I think that if schools begin to change the mindset, and it's not only mathematics important. Empathy is also important, and much more important than mathematics. I always speak with my students and tell them, okay, it's great that you do wonderful in mathematics, but if you also, for example, reduce bullying in your school, if you value empathy, if you communicate with others with respect, so I think that we need a change, a radical change, when we look towards education, when we look at in general, the educational system should change.
So what does it mean if we change what it means to be educated and what it means to be successful?
Exactly.
In education? David, where is the leverage point for you?
Hi, Josh. Yeah, I agree. I think that human progress has been focused on this notion of being able to resolve conflict constructively over larger and larger systems of organization, right? So if we started out as kind of small hunter-gatherer societies and then focused on clans and then city-states and then nation-states, all of this has been premised on the ability to solve conflict in a way that is constructive towards the building of society. And so when we're thinking about our young people and we're thinking about the types of skills that reflect education, we need to move from this idea of conflict resolution or mediation is like the domain of a lawyer or of a professional, and recognize that it's the domain of every single person in society. The same way that we think about, we used to think geometry was only for those who are going into math, or calculus was only for engineers, and then somehow we've decided that it's for everybody. We need to do the same thing with conflict resolution skills. We need to do the same thing with values around social awareness. If we are going to help people and help our societies move from the place that we're in into a place where multicultural context or sense of ourselves is the way that we're going to be, we need to prepare our young people to understand, resolve conflict constructively, and be able to build society through a sense of social awareness.
Beautifully said, David. So let me ask all of you, you have a bumper sticker, and I don't know, do people still a little old fashioned, but you have you have Annabelle's magic wand, and you get to teach 10 million kids one thing. What's the one, and don't say something big like social emotional competence. That's the one competence. That's the one thing that you would prioritize. And I want to ask all of you who are here watching live to put that in the chat. And all of you who are watching the recording, which is going to be way more people, I want you to put that in the comments. What's the one skill that you would prioritize and why? Maria, can we go to you?
Sure. So I think the one skill that I would prioritize is compassionate inquiry. And it comes from this idea or this saying that I heard a while ago: if it's hysterical, it's historical. Meaning that anytime we are overwhelmed with a strong emotion, that there's a history there that we need to be curious about and create the space where we can look and be completely aware of things that align towards positivity and things that hinder positive outcomes in ourselves. And through that curiosity, use a lens of compassion to understand it and to move beyond it. So compassionate inquiry would be a skill that I think is needed now.
Beautiful. Henry, how about you? And then Annabelle.
I think my bumper stick would be quite simple. It would be probably around the lines of, or related to inquiry. Keep learning. Keep learning, because if we see ourselves as learners and we have the intellectual humility to challenge our own assumptions, we have the curiosity and the hunger to continually explore new points of view, new information, and see ourselves on a journey as really just lifelong learners and constantly in a process of self-development, self-improvement, then we can be of service to others, and we can, as we continue to grow as individuals. And Josh, what you were saying at the end of the first panel, that it starts with all of us. So we can't expect for our situation outside us to change unless we as individuals are changing. So I think keep learning and focus on that growth mindset and that benefit mindset of yourself to impact positively the world around you.
Thank you. Annabelle, I can't guess what you're going to say. You're muted.
I want my bumper sticker to say, be an upstander. Be an upstander. I think that one of the things that happens in our society is that silence reigns, and we assume that silence means they're in agreement. So let's stand up for what we believe in. Let's speak up for what we believe in. Let's move forward about what we believe in. Be an upstander.
Well, Annabelle, I was sure you were going to say optimism.
Fooled you.
Yeah, I love it. Maka, how about you? What's your bumper sticker?
Yes, my bumper sticker will be empathy. Empathy, because I think empathy is the core of human progress. And I really believe that if we expand empathy around the world, we will have a better one. And empathy, not only with others, empathy with ourselves as well, because sometimes we're too harsh with ourselves. So I'll choose empathy.
Thank you. And Maria, did we get your bumper sticker? I'm getting confused of whose bumper sticker we got.
Yeah, my bumper sticker was compassionate inquiry.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, with compassion.
All right, so I see them typed here. So whose one is missing?
That's me.
David, what's your bumper sticker?
So I think the way I think about it is, if we had a bumper sticker, I would say listen to learn, and I would focus on perspective taking skills and listening skills. I think that when we listen to people, they don't have to shout, and if we want to be constructive, people have to feel heard. So I think if I could run around in my car and people would be like, "Oh man, that guy is all about listening to learn," I would make an impact on at least the drivers behind me.
All right. Well, mine is going to be about listening as well, but it's going to be about connecting with emotions, connecting with your own emotions, connecting with others' emotions. That they're valuable. All right. Well, one of the questions that came up in the previous part of the show that I want your insight on is, someone talked about the fact that we don't just teach kids, we teach parents, and that parents teach kids, and that actually we really need to think about education from a systemic perspective, particularly in this time of distance learning. So what are you seeing that's working to support the family system to be learners together and to support each other to grow, especially when, parents are also trying to work and do their lives, and kids, we have this very difficult puzzle right now. So how do we unlock that a little bit to help kids and parents and the community work together? Maka, can we come to you again?
Yes, of course. I solidly believe that education is a system, and parents and teachers and directors are part of it, essential part of it. And it is fundamental to involve parents in the education program, in the education program, in the school your kids are going. Here in Peru, for example, many private schools do not solidly include parents in school, no? So then you see the results. Here, for example, what we do here in MAP is we have constant chats with parents. We send progress reports. So we constantly talk with them and make them part of the education process, And nowadays, with all the coronavirus and everything it's going on, it's much more essential because kids are studying with their parents near, no? So they have to be part of it. And I think that one way to do this is to change the typical homework we are giving our kids. Everything has to change. We cannot think that, okay, now school should do the same stuff at home. No, we have to change the homeworks we're giving to our kids, and everything. No? Everything has to change, involving parents.
Yeah. Great. I realized that we didn't really talk about what social emotional learning is. And I know most people watching and listening are familiar with that term. But David, what is social emotional learning?
Oh, hey, Josh. Okay, so social emotional learning is the process by which we learn to interact with ourselves, interact with others in service of solving problems. So it's the outcome of self-management, social management, self-awareness, relationship skills, responsible decision-making. And so what the idea of social emotional learning is, it's the intentional development of these skills and outcomes, right? So if you think about intrapersonal, you think about self-awareness, self-management. These are skills that are related to how we relate to ourselves. If you think of interpersonal, you think about things like relationship skills, decision-making, social awareness. These are skills and values related to how we interact with the world. And these things are all in pursuit of problem solving, right? So if you're looking at an intrapersonal problem, like mood regulation, right? You're gonna be thinking about, how does my awareness of my needs and emotions facilitate my ability to solve the problem of moving my mood to mask a task, right? In the context of emotional intelligence. If you're thinking about self-management, it's about, how do I manage my emotions in order to meet a goal or to meet the expectations of a community or society. So when you think about all these things together, you have a list of 5 skills that are defined by Castle that allow us to really focus on what are the inputs to being to participating in society, as well as solving problems in the inter and intrapersonal sphere.
And Maria, what does that have to do with being culturally competent and culturally effective?
Well, I think the ability to recognize and be aware of your emotional state is through cultural competence. So cultural awareness is being able to see how your frames of reference are impacting how you see the world, impacting how you see yourself. So this cultural awareness tied with social emotional learning gives you a bigger understanding of the world at large and how your internal sort of reflection of yourself is being imprinted on the world and vice versa. So the more we're aware of what our cultural frames of reference are, what we consider normal, and when we experience a disjointed of what we consider normal to what's actually happening in the world, and our feelings allow us to be sort of feeling uneasy or unnerved, then it is an invitation to be curious around that and make a decision around what our purpose is and what our vision is.
So when we have big feelings, there's signals to pay attention to something.
Mm-hmm.
And there's something about our cultural lens and our expectation that's shaping how those emotions arise.
Yes, yes. So a lot of my work in school systems is helping people see the strengths and assets of the communities that they serve. And when you go in with that lens of moving away from a deficient thinking paradigm, and you go in with intention to identify strength, then you sort of create a cultural bridge between the person who's teaching and then the communities that they serve. So culture impacts how we see everything, what we consider to be normal, what we consider to be abnormal. And I think this current uprising is sort of tearing down these illusions of what's been normalized in our society and giving room for people who are subaltern or a part of marginalized groups to say, there's a normality in me, there's a humanity in me as well.
Yeah, it's a beautiful and terrible thing about the human brain that we normalize almost anything. We get used to almost anything, and it just like, oh, that's just the way it is. As at 6 seconds we say fish don't talk about water, it just becomes part of our frame. So David and Henry, in your work, across in Latin America and Colombia, how are you seeing this kind of shifting of people's perception of what's normal and how emotions are helping to create a new conversation?
Yeah, so Colombia is a pretty fascinating country, given the recent history of the country. 50 years of civil war, 6 million displaced people, a lot of violence, and a lot of conflict, and that has brought with it a weight that people carry around with them here, and a kind of a set of cultural norms that are certainly in many ways not productive to building a positive, fair, and trusting society. What we're finding is that the people of Colombia are ready for change and are going through a collective process, and a peace agreement was signed in 2016, and we're seeing, as I mentioned earlier, a genuine interest and a prioritization within the education system here, to focus on social and emotional learning, recognizing that we have to start in schools. We have to rethink the way that teachers are trained. We have to rethink the way that head teachers are trained. We have to lower some of their administrative responsibilities, and increase the support we give them for developing the emotional skills of their students. And yeah, if we want to bring a systemic change to Colombian society, we have to start with the education system. And that's why I say to people when they say, well, what are you doing in Colombia? Why are you working there? I say, I think it's just about the most interesting place to be working, and a tremendous privilege for me to be working in the education system here at a time where emotional well-being has to be at the center of how we bring up young people in this country. Because if it is not, when we're playing against that weight of the past that exists in this country, it's going to be very challenging to change that story collectively and individually.
There's a lot of fantastic comments about this importance of SEL and cultural competence, and a strong agreement, no surprise in our audience about SEL, and really rethinking about people from a strengths-based perspective. But at the same time, we have these cultural norms about showing emotion. And somebody wrote that in Southeast Asia, it's weak to show emotion. I'm sorry, I can't find the comment now. But David, I wonder if I can ask this question. In your cultural experience, what has it been hard for you to be able to talk about emotions and learn to express emotions?
It's a great question, Josh. I think I think it's really important to think about what emotions are, right? And emotions are information, right? They're giving you information about your environment. They're giving you information about yourself in response to the environment. And information is important because when you're trying to communicate to somebody or to an organization or to a group, right, you want to have your needs and understandings effectively communicated to the other people. So I think on the contrary, I think when we're talking about emotions, if we can say, I'm feeling frustrated because of X, Y, and Z. I'm feeling disappointed because you said you're going to be there and you weren't. I'm feeling angry because there's an injustice that's been perpetuated against me or my community. That gives us power. That gives us clear communication. And this is what I'm going to do about it. These are our next steps, right? If you think about what is the alternative to people effectively communicating their emotions, it's one, people communicating their emotions entirely through behavior, right? Which is problematic because, and there's two ways to communicate anger. One is to be angry. The other is to communicate your anger through your actual voice. Mm-hmm. So when you're thinking about effective communication, you're thinking about people who can get their needs and wants communicated effectively, send it, and other people received it. And so when people do that, then we don't have situations where the only way people can communicate it is through behavior, or they don't communicate it at all, which means that there's a lapse in either the relationship or a lapse in the trust because people are looking from two different perspectives of their needs and wants. So I'd say that for me, I push very strongly around clarity of communication of emotion. It doesn't mean necessarily that you have to express emotion through your body. I think there are different cultural rules for that, and I think we need to be sensitive to those things. But I think to the extent that we can communicate our emotions, we can meet our goals, we can support people in meeting their goals, and we can resolve conflict constructively. And I'm going to say one last thing here, particularly in the notion of conflict. People focus on behavior when we know that all behavior is tied to an emotional stimuli, right? Behavior is communication of an emotional situation. So when we communicate our emotions effectively, we don't necessarily have to we have to raise it up into a behavioral kind of response. And if we can concentrate on how people are feeling, then what people are doing makes a lot more sense in terms of understanding the whole purpose in the context of what's happening. So I'd say quickly here that the communication of emotion is a very important aspect for effective communication. And I think that when we talk to people, men, women, different societies, communication of emotion in an accurate sense will help resolve conflict, and that conflict resolution will help people be integrated into their society and solve problems effectively.
Thank you, David. A lot of heads were nodding while you were sharing that. So Annabelle, let's come back to you for a minute. We have some perspective of change. People have talked about we're in a time of change. How does emotional intelligence help us do that better?
Josh, you were talking earlier about the fact that the brain is an amazing instrument and it is essentially selfish and very me-oriented. So one of the things that I love about the 6 seconds model is that we have number 8, which is pursue noble goals. Mark Twain said there were 2 important days in our whole lives. One of them is the day we were born, and the other is the day we discover why we were born. And I am so pleased that 6 seconds is helping people find what their purpose in life is. And while we're looking at that purpose, we help them to explore ethical behaviors and moral development so that there is goodness. I think that's the only word I can think of. So that there are goodness behind their choices as they move forward with their purposes in life.
Thank you. Maria, you've experienced a lot of changing, moving through different cultures, and growing up and now where you are in your life. How has your own relationship with emotions changed in that journey?
So I think when I became more aware of the 6 seconds model of know yourself, choose yourself, and give yourself, I realized that I was very good at recognizing my emotions, but I wasn't actually good at sitting and navigating them. And I think that comes from my positionality as a woman of color, and it comes from my positionality as a Nigerian American, where emotions and talking about emotions is not something that's commonplace. So in moving and going in different environments, I had to learn and take that journey for myself and understand how my cultural values were impacting, both positively and negatively, my ability to navigate emotions so that I can give myself what I need to actualize my noble purpose and my noble goal. So I would say that the journey started with self, but also just recognizing what cultural norms were impacting how I experience my emotions.
There's several comments here. We've talked a little bit about race and relationships. There's a few comments here about gender and changing understandings of gender and how emotions and emotional intelligence can help us learn more there. I think we're going to have another panel about that because it's a topic we haven't talked very much about. Unfortunately, we're coming to the end of our time today. We're having a meeting tomorrow to talk about our current feelings about what's happening in the US and racism and Black Lives Matter and uprising and our roles and how we're feeling and how we can communicate better. So that will be 23 and a half hours from now. Those of you who are watching live, I invite you to be back here for that. Panelists, I'd like to give you each an opportunity to share a closing feeling from today and what you're going to do with that feeling. So once again, Maka, let's start with you.
First of all, thank you, Josh, for inviting me. And what I would like to say now is that we as human beings should take advantage of what we are living now, and we should look at it as an opportunity to think about ourselves, our real motivations, to discover what we've been talking about, our noble goals, our purpose, our reason why we are here in this planet. And we should be very, very creative, because I think that creativity is something we need now to begin to solve problems we've had from long ago. No? But because I see this like this. No? Here, what we're living now in the US, in Latin America, everywhere, it's just the little thing of the iceberg, no? The point of the iceberg. But the iceberg is much more deep. So we are, sorry?
I saw a woman holding a sign at a protest saying, "We're not trying to start a race war, we're trying to end one."
Of course. We have problems from long ago, no? So it's like just the boom of the problem, the explosion of the problem. So let's take this opportunity the world is giving us to reflect and to reconnect with our emotions, with our purpose, with our motivations, with our noble goals.
Maria, thank you, Maka. Maria, what's something you're feeling and what are you going to do with that?
I think I'm feeling very hopeful. And the line that keeps coming up with me, I can't remember the rap song, is like, you better check yourself before you wreck yourself. And the check yourself part is being aware of your own cultural values, your own emotions, your own biases, and sort of having the intention to truly understand the most vulnerable in any population that you're serving. And that understanding comes from seeing value in their story and listening to their story, and also from purposely switching your brain to have the intention to find strengths and using those strengths as leverage points. So that would be my advice.
Thank you, Maria. David, what's a feeling you have, and what are you going to do with that?
Well, first, Josh, I just want to say thank you for having me on. I want to give a shout out to Sherilyn, who's always been supportive of our work over at the Urban Assembly. And Annabelle, it's always nice to work with you and see you. I think with regards to a feeling, I'm feeling optimistic, and I said this before. I think we're starting to really understand the social and emotional components of people's lives as the primary way that they experience events and process information. And so I think as we are more sensitive to how emotions impact our reasoning, how emotions impact our information processing, we're going to be better at understanding how to problem solve in the context of recognizing that people's emotional life and their social and emotional components of their life are one of the most important things to their identity and their sense of purpose. And so I think I'm very optimistic as we look towards the future. We'll be able to really incorporate these notions of social and emotional development, of social and emotional experiences, to understand how do we bring people under a common identity? How do we resolve conflict across differences? How do we listen and perspective take? And when we get good at that, we're going to be able to move forward as a society, as Maria said, by healing, by recognizing, not just papering over, but by bringing it up, putting it out, and then moving forward. And that's why I'm optimistic in the context of what we're facing today.
I just want to share a couple of the comments from the chat, just in case panelists you didn't get to see the appreciations that are coming your way. And I'll share in a second what I'm taking away. But I'm very glad we've gotten to have this conversation today. And Henry, how about for you? What's a feeling you have, and what are you going to do with that?
I guess a feeling I have is determination at the moment. Determination to ensure that SEL takes this opportunity to step into the limelight and become a true priority for our schools, for our head teachers, for our district leaders, and for our parents. And I guess what I'm going to do with that is I'm going to continue to force the issue here in Columbia within my organization, with our partners, and I urge this community, people watching, people taking part, to do the same. That this is the time for SEL to become a true priority and to become something that becomes embedded within our systems, our education systems, our cultural systems, everything that we do. So determination.
Annabelle, how about you?
I'm actually filling myself up with grit. And with that grit, I'm going to find the energy to continue to speak, to teach, to create, to innovate, to be. Josh, I'm not going to retire anytime soon.
Yay! Well, for me, I said earlier, I have been feeling pretty overwhelmed, and there's some reframing that you did on this panel, which is about this moment of escalated challenge and conflict, and bringing these issues front and center is actually a tremendous space for us to do our work in social emotional learning. And I thought it was hard enough to deal with one issue at a time, but maybe that's just not enough. Maybe we really need the challenge to step up and say, yeah, this is the path forward. So thank you for your advocacy, and thank you for being here and for your teaching and connecting. And I appreciate everybody joining us live and watching. Please share in the comments down below the video what else you would like to hear about and how we can help you in this work. And I'll say goodbye to the panel, and Tom, back to you.
Hi, Josh, and everybody who's watching live or watching after the live show. We loved having this panel today. We thought it was important before the recent event, and I think education is the strongest weapon we have for creating the future that we want to see. And a couple of reminders. Join our next show next Tuesday. Is going to be about emotion and arts and how we can express ourselves in that beautiful way. Again, this week there are a lot of other events that are focused on some on education and some in this new context of remote, being online, being separated from our workplaces and from our schools. And so I encourage you to join some of those sessions. I also host a session this Friday on kind of helping you navigate the toolkit that 6 Seconds provides, and listening to some real cases of how to use each one of the tools and what are the pros and cons of using one versus another. And we're going to talk about it in a very practical way. Again, if you like this video, please, you can help us in a very simple way. Subscribe to our channel, like the video, tell your friends, share it on social media. We would like to keep this going, and your support is invaluable right now. And thank you very much. Hope to see you again this week and next week during our next live show. Oh, and don't forget, tomorrow we're going to have a special live stream at 9 a.m. Pacific time about what's the recent event that have been going on with our society. Okay, bye.
If this was helpful, would you please comment, like, share, and subscribe? The Emotional Intelligence Network is your community to grow and practice EQ. At 6 Seconds, that means being smarter with feelings. And we're here to provide practical, proven EQ tools so workplaces, schools, and people can thrive everywhere in the world. Be sure to visit 6seconds.org to find the complete suite of resources, assessments, and programs. Thank you for watching.